Chapter 6 discusses additional database objects. Okay. A database object is anything that has a name and a defined structure. Well, we know about the tables. We've created tables, and the tables that we've created have a name and a defined structure. We define the columns. The table is used to store the data. Okay. Other objects are a sequence, which is an object that's used to generate sequential integers. We typically use a sequence to insert values into primary key fields. Now, they can be used for other reasons, but that's the typical reason for using a sequence. Okay. An index is an object that is associated with specific column or columns within a table, and it allows users to quickly locate specific records. A synonym is an alias for other database objects. It's kind of creating another name for that object. Now, the book might not discuss view. I added this line here. They did not have, this PowerPoint did not originally come with the view listed here. But a view is a logical table. And what it is actually is it's a query, querying columns from a table or from multiple tables. And that's saved as an object, and it's what, if you're familiar with Microsoft Access calls it a query. You save your query. You write your select statement and save it. And that's what a view is in an Oracle database. Okay, sequences. The book does mention they're used for internal control purposes, things like generating check numbers or purchase order numbers, receipt numbers, things like that. But the primary use of a sequence, and I'm not so sure I can say primary, but a very common use of a sequence is to generate a unique value for a column, typically for a primary key column. We see here a definition for a surrogate key. It is very common for surrogate key fields to be created as the primary key for a table. Surrogate means it doesn't have any real correlation with the actual contents of the table. Very common examples are ID numbers. When students come to a school to become a student with that school, they don't bring their ID number with them. It's not actually part of them. Same thing for employee numbers, customer numbers. These are surrogate attributes that are created for the table and for the purpose of keeping a unique value to each record, or creating a unique value for each record. All right, page 178 is the syntax diagram for creating a sequence. There are several optional values that you can use, optional keywords. I'm not real sure if we can refer to these as clauses. The fact that you provide a value if you have the increment by, I would think that's probably a clause. But notice that every single one of these is optional. So we could have, just by using the defaults, just say create sequence and then provide a name. Okay. There's definitely good naming habits to use when coming up with a name for your sequence, and we will see an example in the book, or excuse me, in this presentation, but it doesn't really discuss it. I'll just point it out to you. Know that the sequence, just like the table and all the other objects, they must follow the original naming standards or naming rules that were discussed in Chapter 1, I believe it was, where the database objects can have a maximum of 30 characters, must begin with a character, but can include numbers and the two special values, the pound sign and the underscore. Okay. So, real quickly here, This slide discusses the interval. We can have an increment value other than 1. The 1 is the default. But if you wanted to generate numbers that were not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you could say increment by 2, or increment by 5, or increment by 10. And then the values would increment in that particular sequence. Okay. The start with number, or the starting number of the sequence, it's going to default to 1, but you could have a different start with value. Okay. We will see in the example that they do start with a value other than 1. All right. You can also specify a min value. Well, you would really only want to specify a minimum value if you had a decreasing sequence. Well, what's a decreasing sequence? It's a sequence that increments using negative numbers, or if we can use the term, decrements. So your starting value might be something like 1,000, and every time you generate a value, it deducts 1. So the next number would be 999, and then the next number would be 998. Okay? So you would specify a min value to prevent from going below a certain number. For example, you don't necessarily want to go past or below 1, or go below 0 maybe. You just don't want to get into negative numbers. But of course you could also provide a max value. Now, if you're going to use these, use the sequence to generate values for a primary key, you want to make sure that your field definition is wide enough. For example, you probably don't want to have a 4-digit student ID number. That means the maximum number of students you could have, I suppose, would be 10,000 if you said begin with 0. Honestly, I don't know if you can begin with 0. But if you went from 1 to 9999, then you can have 9,999 students. You might think that's a lot, but probably not. Delta College has current students of over 10,000, and that's currently enrolled. Okay, so you definitely want to make sure that your column values are wide enough. And then sure, you might want to make sure that your max value cannot exceed that maximum number that can be held in that field. Okay? You definitely want to plan for excessive amounts in this case. Okay. The cycle keyword, if it's used, means that the numbers that are generated by the sequence can be reused. So, if your sequence starts with 1, ends with 99, when it gets to 99 and it generates the next value is 1 again. So do you want to use cycle if you're generating primary key values? Probably not. Okay. I can't discuss the order clause in too much detail. It has to do with the caching value also. I am going to have to refer you to the textbook to read on that, but I believe it has something to do with when cache values are more than 1. In other words, the sequence generates, in this case the default is 20, if the sequence generates 20 values for a particular user to use, and the user signs off without using all 20, then the unused values are returned to the sequence for later use. The order clause allows them to be returned in the appropriate order. Okay. And again, please read up on this, because I definitely am not 100% confident on just explaining what the order keyword is used for.